Hi everyone, this is an in-depth tutorial on how to apply an encapsulated silicone prosthetic. So today I'll be using silky silicone adhesive and thinners, witch hazel, 99% isopropyl alcohol, acetone, the Skin Illustrator alcohol activated palettes, the Dirt and Blood palette and the Ultimate Effects palette. I've also using some ad wipes, the Clink Street blood set, a handheld fan, those are very handy, a little bit of baby powder, a sponge, of course some brushes. I'm also using some cotton rounds and a cosmetic wedge. So the prosthetic I'm using today is my brand new stab/prosthetic, available to purchase on my Etsy now. This is an acetone based prosthetic in the colour Pale Glesh. If you're ever unsure of what colour to choose, always go a little bit lighter than your skin tone, because it's much easier to paint the silicone darker than it is to try and make it lighter. So to begin with, I'm going to be cleaning my skin and the back of the prosthetic with some witch hazel. This is to get rid of any oils that could disrupt the bond of the silicone adhesive. So I'm just using these little paper cups that I've got to decant my silicone adhesive and make it nice and easy so we're not doing any cross-contamination. So the first step here is to pin your prosthetic in place. This doesn't have to be very specific, but I normally like to have the prosthetic in the final position that I want it in, and then fold up one half and then adhere that down. So after I apply the adhesive, I'll dry that with a fan and make sure it's completely dry before I stick it down. Now, silicone adhesive is pressure sensitive, so if you don't press too hard, it might not stick in place, so make sure you're pressing nice and firmly. But that also can be quite handy if you accidentally drop a little piece, and you can quite easily pull it back up. So I'm just folding over the other half and then anchoring the other half in place. Again, applying the adhesive all over and drying that with the fan, and then I can very carefully press this firmly down into place as well. Just make sure you take your time with this, there's no rush to get it stuck down. I would also recommend doing this on a model or a body part. That's a lot easier to apply it on because especially if you're a beginner, you're going to need two hands. So now that I've got the core of the prosthetic anchored down in place, I can go around the edges and slowly adhere these down too, making sure it's completely dry. So if you accidentally get an edge that's folded up like this, not to worry, grab your thinners and you can easily dissolve the adhesive back down, and it will stretch out and you can stick it back down once it's dry. This is a super handy tip to know just in case you get any accidents or if you're putting it in a really tricky place like I am here. So once again, just make sure it's dry and then you can stick it back down. Here I'm just using a little sponge with the tiniest bit of baby powder on just to stick down the edges and make sure it's pressed down firmly. So now that you've carefully glued down all of your edges, it's time to blend off the flashing. So I'm using some acetone here to just blend a little hole, and then I can cut the flashing in half and then slowly work this off from around the outside. We don't want to drench the skin in acetone because it can dry the skin out. Also, please be very, very careful when using acetone on the skin and keep it away from your eyes, nose and mouth, as it can be a dangerous solvent. So now I'm using my alcohol activated palettes with a spatter brush to spatter on the colour to paint my prosthetics. It's important to note that if you will be using alcohol activated palettes, you must use 99 or 100% isopropyl alcohol, or otherwise it won't activate the paint. So now that I've mixed up my paint, I can just slowly and lightly spatter it on to the prosthetic. By using this technique, we can slowly build up colour and use different colours to create that kind of mottled effect. As your skin is made up of lots of different colours, we don't want it to look flat. We want to bring some life to it. So I'm just using some various tones of flesh, some blues, some pinks to slowly build up that colour. And sometimes I use my sponge just to take it back a bit if I think it looks a bit too much. Sometimes I like to take a step back and have a look at my other hand and all of the colours and textures that you can see going on there. It's just a little tip or trick if you're unsure of what colour to use. So this is my favourite trick to use of all time. I'm ripping up a cosmetic wedge and just getting my nails in and just ripping it apart. And when we use this in conjunction with the alcohol activated palettes, it's going to give us this gorgeous mottled texture. Depending on the concentration of the colour you use, it will give it lots of different effects, and it's really great to use on the hands, especially on a cold day, because you tend to get that more mottled texture. So using it with some reds is really great. So now dipping into my dashboard palette here, I'm just taking some yellow and we're actually going to focus on the wound itself. This yellow is to recreate the fatty texture that you'll see on actual flesh. And this is basically underpainting for when we put the reds and the bloods in now. So using my Dirt and Blood palette, I'm just going in with the lightest blood shade and painting that over the top of the yellow. Be careful when painting this because you don't want to take the yellow back off. You just want to layer the reds on top. So now going in with the dried blood shade, I'm focusing this on the middle parts of the wound to create that illusion of depth. I'm now just using my finger and a little bit more red to create that erythema around the sides of the wound. Again, using the sponge trick, this is really great at creating that erythema effect. So I'm looking at this and I feel like it needs a little bit more depth, so I'm just going in with the slightest touch of black alcohol paint and deepening that up. And now using some wound filler from Clink Street, this is just to create more texture on the inside of the wound and the venous blood as well. I'm just poking that around with a cotton bud. I'm trying to get it to drip and get messy, and then I can go in with a cotton round and tidy things up and make it look like someone's tended to the wound. So this is the finished applied prosthetic. You can see on that placement, it just looks really gross and flappy. Now for the all important part, removal. I'm using an oil-based remover and a brush to slowly work the prosthetic off the skin. Please be very careful as to not rip the prosthetic straight off, as you can cause damage to your skin. So after like 30 seconds, you'll manage to be able to kind of peel it off very easily. So that's the main portion of the prosthetic off. For any little bits or paint stuck on the outside, I love to use an ad wipe. These things are fantastic at getting the residue off. I really recommend them. So just give your skin a little scrub-a-dub-dub, and there you go. Make sure to check my Etsy out at Poppy's SFX Place to find more prosthetics just like these.